They found it carved into a rock in the Arizona desert, a map of time itself, scratched into stone by hands that never wrote a single word in any language you would recognize. 9 signs, 9 warnings, a blueprint for the end of one world and the beginning of another. The Hopi elders guarded that stone for centuries. They passed the meaning down in low voices around fires, refusing to sell it, refusing to print it, refusing to hand it to the historians who kept knocking on their door. And when a few outsiders finally sat down and listened, they realized something that should have been impossible. The signs were coming true, in order, one after another. Today, 4 of them have already happened, and the 5th, the final one, is the sign nobody wants to say out loud. But here is where the story stops being a legend and starts becoming a problem. Because the Hopi are not the only ones who remembered a world, I have to pause here for a second. Because what I just described, that is one case from a much larger pattern. There are 35 documented cases in a document I put together. Different cities, different decades, different types of evidence. Every single one follows the same sequence: discovered, documented, acquired, disappeared. I could not fit all of it into a video. It's in the pinned comment below. Find it before we continue. Our history books swear never existed. Across the ocean, on old maps drawn by kings and cartographers, there was a name for a lost empire that stretched from the edge of Europe to the far side of Asia. They called it Tartaria. It appears in atlas after atlas, printed in ink, sold in bookshops, hung on the walls of universities, and then, sometime in the last 200 years, it vanished. Not conquered, not renamed, erased, as if someone went back through the record and quietly closed a door. And it is not just the name that vanished. Look closer at the physical record, and the questions pile up faster than anyone can answer them. All across the world, there are buildings that appear to be standing with their ground floors buried, windows sunk halfway below street level, ornate doorways opening into dirt, as if a wave of mud rolled through the entire planet at once, and everyone simply built on top of it and moved on. The revisionists call it the mud flood. Then there are the great fires that swept through city after city in the same narrow window of history, conveniently clearing away the oldest and grandest structures right before the modern age was declared to begin. And the strangest detail of all, the enormous, breathtaking palaces of the world's fairs, buildings the size of small cities, covered in detail no temporary structure would ever justify, raised in a matter of months, and then torn down and denied, as if they were props left over from a civilization that had to be dismantled before too many people started asking how it was really built. Historians have answers for each of these, of course. The buildings sank because of drainage. The fires were accidents. The fairs were just ambition. And taken one at a time, each answer is reasonable enough. But line them all up, in the same handful of decades, and a pattern starts to press against the glass. A pattern the Hopi would have recognized instantly. The end of one world and the paving over of another, because whatever really happened, the outcome is not in dispute. A grander, older story was closed. A simpler one was opened in its place, and a whole generation with no memory of the world before was raised inside the new version and told it was the only version that had ever existed. So today we are going to walk through 5 Hopi predictions for the year 2026 that mainstream historians genuinely cannot explain away. We are going to line them up against the story of a civilization that was scrubbed from the map. And by the time we reach the 3rd one, the one that already happened, you are going to have a very uncomfortable question sitting in the back of your mind. What if these are not 2 separate mysteries at all? What if they are the same warning, told twice, by 2 peoples who were never supposed to meet? Let's go back to the beginning. Long before Arizona had a name, the Hopi told a story about the worlds that came before this one. Not one world, not 2. 3 previous worlds, each one built up by human hands, each one lifted to a height of wealth and knowledge that we would call impossible today, and each one destroyed, not by accident, by imbalance. The elders said that every time a world grows rich, it grows arrogant, and every time it grows arrogant, it forgets the agreement it made with the land. The people chase gold instead of grain. They build towers instead of homes. They trade real things for paper promises. And then the correction comes. Fire or ice or water. The slate is wiped, the survivors crawl out, and the whole thing begins again. And pay attention to the reason the elders gave, because it is not what you would expect from an ancient spiritual story. They did not say the world's ended because the gods were angry, or because of sin in the way we usually mean it. They said the world's ended because of an economy of greed. Because a few people learned to hoard what belonged to everyone, and dressed that hoarding up as progress, and convinced the rest to trade away their independence for the promise of more. Each world climbed higher on that promise, and each world fell further when the promise finally broke. The Hopi were not describing weather, they were describing debt. They were describing the exact moment when a society decides that the appearance of wealth matters more than the substance of it, and quietly signs its own ending. Now hold that thought, because that is not a religious idea. That is an economic one. The Hopi were describing a cycle of boom, corruption, and collapse thousands of years before anyone printed a dollar bill. And that cycle is the exact thing our missing empire was supposed to prove. Look at the old drawings of Tartaria, and you notice something odd immediately. The buildings do not match the story we were told about the past. We are taught that a few centuries ago most of the world lived in mud, poverty and darkness, that grand architecture belonged only to a handful of kings. But the record shows enormous stone structures, cathedrals with acoustics no modern engineer can reproduce cheaply, star forts shaped with a precision that had no military reason to exist, and cities built on a scale that supposedly no one had the population or the power to fill. The revisionist argument is simple, and it is not really about aliens or magic. It is about money. It asks one question. Who paid for all of this, and where did their wealth go? There is more. The old cities are dotted with strange, identical star-shaped fortifications, thousands of them, built with a geometric precision that served no clear military purpose anyone can agree on. There are the towers and spires and domes that the revisionists claim were never chimneys or decoration at all, but part of a system for gathering energy out of the air itself, a technology that would have made power free and therefore made control impossible. And there is the uncomfortable fact that the very moment this supposed old world ends, a new kind of money quietly begins. Central banks, national debts, paper currency backed by nothing but the promise of a government. It is almost as if the erasure of the old world and the birth of the debt world happened in the same breath. Destroy the memory of free abundance, and you can sell people scarcity for the rest of time. That is the thread that ties the desert stone to the vanished empire. Both are stories about a lost economy, a way of living that produced abundance, and then disappeared so completely that we were taught to believe it never happened. And this is the exact spot where the academics go quiet. Ask a mainstream historian about the Hopi prophecy, and you will get one of two answers. The first is that the predictions are too vague to mean anything, that you can bend a spider web or a river of stone to fit almost any era if you try hard enough. The second is that the predictions were quietly edited after the fact, updated by later generations to match events that had already occurred. Both answers sound tidy. Both fall apart the moment you look at the actual record. The core of these signs was written down and published by outsiders decades before the events they describe. The web, the ashes that flip the value of everything, the Black Seas. These were on paper long before the recent wave of inflation, long before central banks started hoarding metal, long before a single ordinary person felt the ground shift under their savings. You cannot edit a prophecy after the fact when the prophecy is sitting in a printed book that predates the headline. And that is why, when you push hard enough, the confident explanations tend to dissolve into a shrug and a change of subject. It is simply easier to call it coincidence than to explain how a desert people, with no stock market and no printing press, managed to describe the collapse of a paper economy they had never once seen. So let's get into the signs. The first Hopi prediction describes a great spiderweb spreading across the entire land. The elders said that in the age before the end, you would see the earth covered in a web of thin lines, crossing over hills and valleys, connecting every corner of the world so that no place could hide from any other place. For a long time, people assumed this meant telephone wires. Then they assumed it meant power lines. Then the internet arrived, and everyone nodded and said, "There it is, the web, the prophecy is fulfilled, moving on." But that reading is lazy, and it misses the economic warning underneath it. The Hopi did not describe a web of communication. They described a web of dependence, a world where every single person is tied by invisible threads to a central point, and where those threads can be pulled. Think about what actually happened. We did not just connect, we got captured. Your money is a number on a server you will never see. Your ability to buy food depends on a network staying online. Your savings, your job, your access to the basics of survival, all of it now runs through a web of systems that you do not own and cannot touch. Cut one thread and a person cannot buy bread. That is not connection. That is a leash. And notice who benefits from a leash. A world of independent people is a world that is hard to control and impossible to tax cleanly. A world where every transaction passes through the web is a world where every transaction can be watched, scored, frozen, or erased. The elders did not have the words for a digital ledger, but they described its function perfectly. A single thread running from the center to every home, carrying not just messages but permission. Permission to buy, permission to sell, permission to exist inside the system at all. And here is where Tartaria walks back into the room. The revisionist history claims that the old world ran on a completely different kind of energy and a completely different kind of exchange. Free, local, decentralized. Water and atmosphere and resonance doing the work that we now pay a monthly bill for. Whether or not you believe a word of that, notice the shape of the story. A world that was independent was replaced by a world that is dependent. The web did not appear to connect us. It appeared to bill us. The first sign was never about wires. It was about who holds the other end of the string. That sign is complete. Look out any window and you will see the threads. So the elders would say, we are already deep into the prophecy, not standing at its edge. The second prediction is stranger, and it is the one historians hate the most because it is oddly specific. The Hopi spoke of rivers of stone that would run across the land, and of a time when you would be able to travel through the sky and speak into the air and be heard across the world. The rivers of stone are easy. Those are the roads, the endless grey highways poured over ground that used to grow food. But listen to the second half of that sign, because it is not about travel, it is about erasure. The prophecy warns that when the rivers of stone appear, it will mean the old paths have been paved over and forgotten. The trails your ancestors walked, the places they gathered, the knowledge tied to the land itself, all of it buried under something flat and grey and identical from one horizon to the next. And this is exactly the accusation at the heart of the revisionist economic story. The claim is that in a single stretch of history, an entire way of building, an entire way of trading, an entire way of living was flattened and repaved. Old cities were relabeled as new. Structures that took centuries to raise were suddenly credited to a handful of years and a few hundred workers. The past was not remembered. It was resurfaced, like a road, so that the thing underneath could never be dug up again. Ask yourself an honest question. When a civilization gets wealthy enough to build monuments that last 1,000 years, where does that wealth go when the civilization ends? It does not evaporate. Gold does not burn. Land does not vanish. Somebody inherited it. Somebody wrote the new history. And the people who write the history are almost always the people who ended up holding the money. The river of stone is not just concrete. It is the smooth, featureless story we were handed to replace the messy, expensive truth. Consider how quickly it happens, even in the history you can personally remember. A neighborhood that stood for 100 years is flattened in a single weekend, and within a decade nobody can tell you what used to be there. Now stretch that across an entire civilization. Stretch it across the wealth of a whole vanished world. Before I go further, that document in the pinned comment. If you have not found it yet, go there now, because everything I cover in these videos is one piece of a pattern that only becomes visible when you see all 35 cases together. The document shows you the full pattern. What I can show you here is the surface. What is down there is everything underneath it. Pinned comment, now, then come back. The river of stone is not only the highway. It is the smoothing over of memory itself, the deliberate loss of the knowledge of how the old abundance was built, so that the people living on top of it never think to ask where it went or how to make it again. That sign too has arrived. The roads are here. The old world is buried under them. 2 signs down. And now we reach the third, the one that already happened. The one that made me sit up and actually take this seriously instead of treating it like desert folklore. The third Hopi prediction is the most direct of them all, and for most of the last century it made no sense to anyone who read it. The elders warned of a day when the containers of ashes would be tipped from the sky, and when those ashes fell, they would burn the land, boil the seas, and turn the value of everything upside down. People assumed this meant war. Bombs falling, fire from above. And maybe part of it is, but look at the specific wording that survived. The ashes would turn the value of everything upside down, not the land upside down, the value. The Hopi were describing a moment when what people believed was precious would suddenly be worthless, and what people ignored would suddenly be the only thing worth holding. They were describing a financial reset, a day when the paper in your pocket loses its meaning overnight, when the numbers on the screen stop protecting you, when the systems that everyone trusted to hold value simply stop holding it. Now think about the last 2 years. Think about what you have watched happen and what you have felt in your own life. The quiet panic when prices climbed and never came back down. The banks that wobbled and were caught only at the last second. The steady, deliberate move by nation after nation away from the currency that ruled the world for generations, buying up hard metal instead, stacking gold in vaults like they were preparing for something. Central banks bought more gold in this recent stretch than at almost any point in living memory. Ask yourself why. Ask yourself what people who can see the whole board know that you are not being told. And here is the detail that turns a prophecy into a warning you can actually use. The ashes do not fall on everyone equally. When the value of everything flips, the people holding paper get burned, and the people holding real things get lifted. That is not an accident of the collapse. That is the entire point of it. Every reset in recorded history has moved wealth in the same direction, upward, from the many who trusted the currency to the few who owned the assets underneath it. The Hopi did not frame it as economics, because they had no such word. They framed it as balance and imbalance, as the land taking back what was taken from it. But the mechanism is identical. A world that trades real value for paper promises will, sooner or later, watch those promises turn to ash. And the ones who saw it coming will be standing on solid ground while everyone else is choking on the smoke. The value of everything is turning upside down. Not in a movie, not in a prophecy scroll, in your grocery bill, in your rent, in the fact that the money you saved buys less every single month while the assets of the very wealthy climb into the sky. The container of ashes did not fall as a bomb. It fell as inflation, as debt, as a slow burning of trust in the entire structure of paper money. And the timing lines up with the year the Hopi calendar was always pointed toward. This is the Tartaria connection in its purest form. Because the whole revisionist economic argument is that this has happened before, that a functioning, abundant, decentralized economy was deliberately collapsed and replaced with a system of central control and paper debt, that the Great Reset is not a new idea. It is an old tool, used again and again, every time the people at the top need to wipe the board and deal themselves a fresh hand while everyone else starts from zero. The Hopi called it the tipping of the ashes. The revisionists call it the reset. They are describing the same machine, and it just ran. That is the part that should keep you up at night, not a prediction about the future, a description of the present. The third sign is not coming. The third sign is the news. Take a breath, because it gets heavier from here. The fourth prediction moves from the land to the water. The Hopi said that near the end, the seas would turn black, and that the creatures of the ocean would die, and that this darkness on the water would be a signal that the balance was almost gone. For a long time this was read as pollution, oil spills, the visible poisoning of the oceans. And there is truth in that reading, but the deeper meaning follows the same pattern as every sign before it. It is not really about the water. It is about the flood of something dark and hidden that drowns the real world. Follow the money one more time. The oceans in the prophecy are the oceans of value that move beneath the surface of everyday life. The hidden rivers of wealth that flow between the powerful, invisible to the people living on top of them. In our age, the seas of black are the oceans of debt. The trillions upon trillions of obligations stacked on top of an economy that produces a fraction of what it owes. It is the dark money that moves through channels no ordinary person can see or touch. It is the derivative markets, the shadow banking, the vast tide of paper claims floating over a shrinking pool of real things. When that sea turns black, the elders warned, the creatures within it die, the small savers, the ordinary workers, the people who trusted that the water beneath them was solid ground. And this again is the exact shape of the Tartaria collapse story. A world of real, tangible produced wealth, replaced by a world of abstract claims. Real gold traded for paper receipts for gold. Real land traded for deeds and mortgages and leases. Real value drowned under an ocean of promises that everyone knows, somewhere deep down, can never all be kept. The sea of black is not oil. It is the flood of unpayable debt that every empire pours over its people right before the correction arrives. Is that sign here? Look at the total debt of the world and decide for yourself. The ocean has never been darker. The fourth sign is not a distant warning. It is the water we are already swimming in. And think about how invisible it is until the moment it is not. A person can live their entire life on the surface of that black ocean and never once see the depth of it, never know how much debt is stacked beneath their feet, never suspect that the ground they call solid is really just the top of a wave. That is what makes the fourth sign so cruel. It does not announce itself. It simply rises, quietly, year after year, until the day the tide finally goes out and everyone discovers at the very same instant how little was ever really there. Which brings us, finally, to the fifth, the last sign. The one the elders spoke about the least, because it was the one they feared the most. The fifth Hopi prediction describes a dwelling place in the heavens that will fall to the earth with a great crash, appearing as a blue star. When this blue star appears, the elders said, the ceremonies of the old world will end, and the great purification will begin. The fourth world, our world, the one we are standing in right now, will close. And the fifth world, whatever it is, will open in its place. Now the New Age crowd loves to read this as a comet, or a planet, or some object in the sky, and maybe there is something to that. But strip away the mysticism and look at the economic skeleton underneath, the same skeleton that has been hiding inside every single sign. A dwelling place in the heavens that falls to earth. What lives up in the heavens, untouchable, above ordinary people in our world? The wealth does. The value does. The entire financial system floats above us like a structure in the sky, held up by nothing but belief, and every one of us lives underneath it, hoping it never comes down. The fifth sign is the day it comes down, the day the structure in the sky, the whole floating edifice of paper value and digital money and borrowed time, finally falls to the ground with a crash. And the elders were clear about what follows. Not the end of the world. The end of a world, a purification, a reset back to real things. Land, water, skill, trust between neighbors. The things that had value in the lost world before the web, and the rivers of stone, and the ashes and the black seas buried them. And notice that the elders never promised the fifth world would be worse, only that it would be honest. A world stripped back to what is real, where a thing is worth what it is worth, and not a penny of borrowed belief more. That is a terrifying prospect for anyone whose entire fortune floats in the sky, and it is a strangely hopeful one for anyone standing on the ground. The crash the Hopi described is not the death of everything. It is the end of the illusion that paper was ever the same thing as wealth. This is the moment where the Hopi and the ghost of Tartaria finally say the same sentence. Both of them are telling you that a great and abundant world already fell once. Both of them are telling you that the fall was not natural, that it was a correction, an erasure, a reset engineered by the imbalance of a civilization that chased paper over substance. And both of them are telling you that it happens in cycles, and that the cycle is closing again, and that we are not at the beginning of the story, we are near the end of it. 4 signs have already come. The web that binds us, the stone that buried the old paths, the ashes that turned value upside down, the seas that are running black with debt. Only the 5th remains, only the crash from the heavens. And if the first 4 arrived exactly as the elders described, in order, on schedule, then the honest question is not whether the 5th is real. The honest question is how close we are standing to it right now. So what do we do with all of this? What is the point of a warning if it only tells you that something is falling? Here is the part the historians skip, because it does not fit in a footnote. The Hopi never told this story to frighten people. They told it to prepare them. Every version of the prophecy ends the same way, with a choice. When the 5th world opens, the elders said, the people who survive it will not be the richest or the strongest. They will be the ones who remembered how to live in the real world. The ones who kept their hands in the soil, who knew their neighbors, who held something of actual value instead of a number on a screen. The prophecy is not a countdown to doom. It is a set of instructions for what to hold on to when the paper burns. And that is the same lesson buried under the ruins of the empire we were told to forget. Whatever Tartaria truly was, real history or misread maps, the story it carries is a story about wealth that was solid and then was replaced by wealth that was hollow, and about a people who let it happen because they trusted the story they were handed instead of the ground under their feet. 2 peoples, 2 continents, 1 warning, repeated across a gap of thousands of miles and thousands of years. Chase the paper and you inherit the collapse. Chase the real and you survive the reset. So take the prophecy seriously, not as fortune-telling, but as pattern recognition across time. 2 cultures that never spoke, looked at the same forces and drew the same conclusion. Civilizations rise on real production, get seduced by paper abstraction, inflate that abstraction until it snaps, and then reset back down to the ground. The Hopi carved it into stone. The old cartographers left it in the gaps of their maps. And the modern revisionist, digging through demolished palaces and buried doorways, keeps arriving at the very same door the elders were quietly guarding all along. Not a story about the end of the world. A story about the end of a lie and the return of whatever was real before it. The stone in the desert is still there. The old maps are still in the archives if you know where to look. 4 of the 5 signs have already turned, exactly as they were carved, and the value of everything really did just tip upside down while most people were looking the other way. Maybe it is all coincidence. Maybe a scattered desert nation and a forgotten empire simply guessed at the same shadows. Or maybe, just maybe, they both saw the same machine turning, and both tried, in their own language, to leave us a note. The note says the same thing either way. The world you think is permanent has fallen before. It is built on paper, and paper burns, and the only question that has ever mattered is whether you will be holding something real when the ashes come down. 4 signs are behind us, 1 remains, and the elders would tell you, if they were sitting here right now, that the smartest thing you can do is stop asking when it happens, and start asking what you are still holding that would survive it. Because that is the one lesson both the stone and the maps agree on without a single contradiction. The collapse is not the surprise, the collapse is the pattern. It has happened to every world that came before, and it will happen to this one. And the only variable that has ever really changed is who saw it coming. The elders saw it. The old cartographers hinted at it. And now you have watched 4 of the 5 signs turn with your own eyes, in your own lifetime, in your own bank account. The 5th is the only chapter left unwritten. And whether it arrives next year or 10 years from now, the preparation is exactly the same. Hold something real. Own nothing you cannot cover. Know the people around you, and stop mistaking the number on the screen for the wealth it only pretends to be. What do you think is holding this whole thing up? And what would you want in your hands the day the sky finally lets go? 4 signs behind us, and only 1 left ahead. The stone in the desert gave its answer long ago, and the old maps, in their silence, seem to agree with it. The only question still open is whether you will be listening on the day the last one arrives.